I've always had a great interest in history, obviously. I mean, I've done songs that range all the way from the Trojan War into the future. And I don't know that I'm bridging a gap. It's awfully nice if as often happens, I'll sing a song about something and it will inspire someone to go off and read a book about it. And I mean, that's, people tell me, oh, you know, like I just read Peter the Great or something, you know, because of one of your songs, that's wonderful, you know. But I mean, I like them to work on different levels. I mean, there are people who, you know, listen to a song like Lord Grenville or On the Border or whatever, and they like the tune and they don't, you know, pay a great deal of attention to it. There are other people who go out and research every single nuance of what I do in great detail, and they come up with meanings that even I hadn't intended, and that's okay too. But, you know, you can take it any which way you want, really. In the case of Year of the Cat, I'm sure some people bought it just because they like the saxophone solo. So there is a great range, you know, of how detailed people get in listening to my songs. I mean, the ones who are very fanatical do strange things. I mean, there's a fellow out there who translates them into Latin, for example, and then retranslates them back into English to see, you know, if that gives it a different historical flavor. And this man just did Sampan. Got a little bit stalled when he tried to write about the Michelin Rubber Company, that of course didn't exist in Roman times, so he translated it into shipping ochre to dye the togas of the Roman Senate, and it actually read extremely well. And I was deeply impressed. It's nothing that I would have thought of, but I mean, that's an example of someone who is fairly dedicated. Oh, I have some eccentric supporters out there.
Well, what do you think about that?
I think it's the nature of the beast. I mean, in
pop singing?
Well, it probably is the nature of all pop singing, but certainly, I mean, if you take it into the sort of obscure realms that I have, people tend to, I don't know, they read all manner of things into it. I'm sure that Madonna gets very different fan mail to me, you know.
Think? Well,
but I'm sure she gets some pretty bizarre stuff, you know.
Did Year of the Cat, the success of that, did that surprise you?
Well, yeah, I mean, the amount of success surprised me. What had happened, that was my 7th album. The early ones weren't released in America, but it was my 7th, chronologically. And each one in England had sold a little more than the one before. So people always forget that Modern Times was actually a top 30 record here, which was the one that went before it. And we listened back to Year of the Cat, and all the omens were that it would do better than Modern Times. So I was wandering around thinking we're probably going to have a top 20 hit. I didn't know we were going to have a top 5 hit, but I did think that it was going to do well. In fact, I had my goal for it was to sell 250,000, so because the one before had done 150,000. So realistically, I thought it was going to do quite well. I didn't know how well.
So there's a building up process there that you expect?
Well, I think at that stage of your life, I mean, artists go through lives and half-lives, you know. At that particular point in time, based on what was being played on the radio, we're talking the mid-70s, Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, Van Morrison, I mean, all the kind of stuff that, you know, can't get arrested now is actually fairly popular at radio then. So I knew that it was going to get radio play, and if you get airplay, you will sell records unless it's a total dog, you know. So I had assumed that you know, if they kept playing it, then it would sell. And actually, what happened, oddly enough, was that radio changed completely straight after Year of the Cat. It was, in a way, it was one of the last singer-songwriter albums to get in before they closed the door. Because within a year, I think, after Year of the Cat was a hit, the radio was playing mostly stuff like Loverboy, and it was a much meatier, beefier, rockier sound. Really, by the time the 80s came in, it was, I mean, all the singer-songwriters right across the whole range had dropped out of sight, you know, at AOR radio. But in the mid-70s, so they were playing it, so I've always thought, realistically, I was extremely lucky to release it when I did.
Where do you think we're at now?
What, at radio? I mean, I listen to some radio stations. You know, well, you know what's being played. I think there's a great diversity now. AOR throughout the 60s and the first part of the 70s was a term that encompassed, say, everybody from me to Led Zeppelin. Now, if you want to listen to whatever the modern equivalent of Led Zeppelin is, say Bush or something like that, you know, you would listen to I should probably listen to the local rock station. If you wanted to hear a singer-songwriter, you'd listen to a AAA station and so on and so forth. I mean, it may be different where you are, but certainly in all of the major cities, they have maybe 70, 80 different radio stations, and one plays country, and one plays rap, and one plays what have you. So it's totally balkanized. Whereas I think that certainly in the late 60s, when I first started listening to American radio, and certainly in the early 70s, rock encompassed like the whole broad range of just about everything, which in a way was nice because you had, you could meet someone your own age and would have instantly things in common if you listened to music. Whereas that seems to have changed quite radically. There are the people who listen to country, won't go near rap with a with a pitchfork, and vice versa, and it's got very balkanized out there.
So niche-oriented, specialized?
I think as it goes on, it actually becomes more niche-oriented, I think. Of course, we're doing historical folk rock. I have the ultimate niche because I am, and always have been, the only person in the world doing it. So.
Why write about history?
Well, I think I tend to float around in history all the time in life. Most people live in 1995 because that's the reality of their lives. Because, if you're working like a 9-to-5 job or whatever, and then you come home and there's a girlfriend or a wife, family or something, you know what I mean? You live in the present because your time is very much taken up. My time is quite extraordinary. I have, I probably have at least 6 months of the year in which I do absolutely nothing apart from read books, gaze out of the window, and ruminate on things. And to have this amount of time basically to daydream, it means that I'm able to spend whole days living in different time periods. Depending on what book I'm reading, I tend to basically be there. If I'm reading A Distant Mirror by Barbara Tuchman, then I'm in the 14th century. If I'm reading something about the Trojan War, then I'm back in 1250 BC. That is just. I spent at least 3 months a few years back, essentially being back in Troy. It was an extraordinary experience because whenever I went out, to shop or something, I'd be confronted with the modern world. But because the part of Los Angeles I'm in is so remote, it's in a canyon, and I'm looking out the window now, I can't see any other houses. It's very easy to drift off into whatever the world is that you've conjured up in your mind, and you can actually spend sort of several days at a time doing this if you're in this incredibly fortunate position which singer-songwriters seem to be in, that you have the time to do it. I have the time to dream, essentially, so that's why I do it.
So is that what you're doing for people?
Yeah, I think I'm sort of musing on things, and but they have to have some sort of human relevance. They have to relate in some way to something about the human condition which is relevant to today. So when I wrote about Helen and Cassandra, they seem to me prototypical women. The whole of Los Angeles is full of, I would say mostly Helens. The Cassandras are always the ones that are more interesting to me. But I look at, I see Helens all the time. Madonna is an absolute Helen. Whereas Sinead O'Connor is an absolute Cassandra. There's no doubt about it. And I've always found the Cassandras more interesting. But when I wrote the song, I went around seeing Helens and Cassandras everywhere at the time that I was doing that. And so, it is relative to the human condition today. They're archetypical.
Well, what about this period here for the new album, the 20s and 30s?
Yeah, but...
let's talk about the relevancy there.
Well, in the Super Bowl of World Wars, parts 1 and 2, this was the halftime show. And it's an interesting period. It's bisected, of course, by the Wall Street crash, almost exactly down the middle, with the Jazz Age and all that went with it in the first part, and then the first part, and then the rise of all the dictatorships in the second part as we got ready for round 2. It's a period that my mother grew up in, and it's a period that is curious, but I certainly wouldn't have wanted to have been around. I think the period from 29 to 45 is of almost all the periods in history, apart from the second half of the 14th century and the first half of the 15th. I think that's one of the things that I would have, with the time machine, avoided, which makes it interesting to write about. But on this album, I deliberately avoided the obvious stuff. Hitler and Mussolini and Turgot get passing mentions in Three Mules, but
then you got Betty Boop.
I tried to sort of balance it. You have because life is just not. You can't be all Cassandra. It would have been very easy with this time period to have sort of played up the doom and gloom. But I wanted to have a balanced album, and yes, Betty Boop, and there are lots of sort of lighter things on this record, but I wanted some sun in the shadows. And I think one of the wonderful things which you can do if you have this historical 2020 is that you can do little foreboding things, like in a song like, say, Lindbergh Comes to Town, which is really, I mean, an upbeat thing. Nonetheless, the guy is 1927, and he's sticking his money into the stock market, and you and I know what's going to happen. He doesn't. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with 1927. Calvin Coolidge presided over that, the last sort of great, innocent, happy American period for a long time to come. So yes, and that happens all the way through the record, incidentally. I mean, Laughing into 1939 is a whole foreboding song, but there are many of these foreboding lines that appear in different songs.
What do they call that? Foreshadowing.
Yes, that's exactly what they call it. I say foreboding, you say foreshadowing. I say potato, you say tomato.
Who's listening? Who are the people tuning into this? Well, you mentioned some of these eccentric characters.
Well, it's fun because the computer thing, there's an Stewart mailing list on that's generated. I don't know very little about computers, but I know how to switch it on and find this thing. There are about 30 or 40 messages come in a day. I think there are maybe a couple of hundred people who subscribe to it, and obviously they're the most involved, and they leave long, complicated messages about. I mean, they have explored every single bit of this record. I mean, they've taken it apart, put it back together again, told me things I never dreamt about it. It's interesting. The most popular song of the album for, say, the average person is probably Sampound. The most popular song for the mailing list people is undoubtedly League of Notions. So that it just shows the difference, you know.
Is that one of the points of art? Is so that people can almost add something to it? You're mentioning people. No,
I think that's absolutely right. I think, in fact, this is a discussion that's been going on recently. The concept that when a work of art is created, the moment that it leaves the creator, it becomes something almost in the public domain that anybody can add to or subtract from according to the way they want it to visualize it. And I think that's probably true.
So maybe that's what your listeners are attracted to, the ability to be able to do that.
I think so. The first 4 albums I made were just, your basic straightforward love songs, and if you can call an 18-minute song basic and straightforward, I mean, they were they were love songs anyway. And they were very much, if it happened, I wrote it down, and then after, and I was getting, sort of accused of dotting the I's and crossing the T's too much, which I was doing. So, starting with the 5th one, which was the first historical one, I tried to get into more of a realm where people could project themselves into the songs. And some of them are very nebulous. I mean, Year of the Cat is a very nebulous song. Someone once said to me that art should hover on the fringe of the consciousness, which is a nice way of putting it.
So you've been working on this for quite a while.
Nearly a quarter of a century. Yeah, it's like, so it's an interesting experiment. I mean, it has virtually no commercial application. In fact, my life is financed by Year of the Cat in order to do historical folk rock.
Interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, the song that has made the money over the years is the one I'm least interested in. Or it's enabled me to pursue, in fact, an entirely different career. I don't know of many artists who actually do that. I mean, it's almost as if, say, your primary love was jazz, so you put out Louie Louie, and the royalty checks from Louie Louie enabled you to play modern jazz. You know what I mean? Basically, that's almost how my career has gone.
Interesting.
It is. It's bizarre, I think, but to use it to go down a completely different avenue is really that's fairly eccentric, I would think. But that was what I wanted to do, and there was no way that Roads to Moscow or Old Admirals were going to be played on AM radio. I mean, I just, there was just no way, that the airplay that you need to sell buckets of records is, you've got to be on, you've got to be able to flip the dial and come up on half a dozen different stations.
You described your time of being able to read and dream.
Mm-hmm.
When does songwriting and composing come in?
Well, that's part of the process. I mean, if you, I'm usually at any given time walking around the house thinking of a song. I mean, before you phoned, for example, I was trying to write a song about Lord Salisbury, who was the Prime Minister of England in 1895, because I've been wandering around thinking about the Belle Epoque and the fin de siècle as an interesting period to visit. So, I mean, I kind of ruminate on Salisbury, and I peer out of the window, and somewhere in between breakfast and lunch, maybe come up with a verse or two. I mean, but it's all part of it. You have to do quite a lot of reading and dreaming for, anything to really begin to want to be written. At least I do. I think in many aspects, I think I'm somewhat Victorian in the way that I work. I mean, I definitely don't work the way that people tend to in the 90s. I mean, there are people, if they can get 300 gigs a year, or if they can, put out an album every 6 months or whatever, very often do this. I mean, Elton John, seems to be a complete workaholic, and I do function in exactly the opposite way. I mean, if I do 50 or 60 gigs a year, it's a miracle, and because, I want to make enough to pay the mortgage and feed us, and basically beyond that, I'd rather have the free time to myself, which is a different way of doing it, and not one that endears you necessarily to the record industry, but it makes for a wonderful life,
The impression I'm getting is that you fill your plate up with historical materials or cultural materials, whatever it is, but the thing that you're actually thinking about is music?
Oh yeah, well, music and lyrics. I mean, I try to, because I hear songs long before they're written. I hear them playing in my mind. I mean, I actually sometimes have dreamt. I have this dream, it's a recurring dream, where I'm holding one of my albums in my hand, but it's an album I've never made. But, what's the weirdest thing is that I put it on, I've stuck it on the turntable and listened to the whole thing, and there are...
In your dream?
In my dream, and there are songs that I hear on that record that I go and I said, I'm really glad I made this record, it's really cool. And there are songs and I can go back to it in dreams and put it on and play it, and I hear the same songs again, but I've never written those songs, and I've never made that record.
Wow.
Isn't that wow?
Yeah.
I mean, I wish I could access it and actually have some memory of it, because I'd love to record the songs, but I only ever get a chance to play it when I'm asleep. So, I mean, there is a quite literal example of dreaming and writing.
So do you have any kind of feelings about the spirit of contemporary humans being connected to past humans?
Yes, I've always had this really clear impression of everybody. It's like a giant pyramid. Everybody is standing on the shoulders of the generation that went down into infinity, or at least back to Thrace, put it that way. And I think that we owe our forebears both understanding and a great deal of, we don't owe them all thanks, but life is, I mean, we are the beneficiaries of everything that has gone before, but good and bad, and we get the chance to learn from it. And this is, one of the things that I feel very strongly about. So, but another song I'm trying to write actually says exactly that. All these people, the ghosts of all these people walk beside the modern man unobserved is the line that I want to get in. Because to a vast number of people, these ghosts are unobserved. But, they're all around me all the time, and I'm well aware of them.
Are those lyrics you just kind of mentioned there?
Yes. I mean, it's a line from a song I haven't written yet. At any given time, I have a bunch of songs that are in some stage of development. I mean, maybe I've got one line, maybe I've got one verse, and maybe I've got a bit of the tune.
Let's just talk about something a little less heady, and that is your partner here, Laurence Juber.
Right.
It seems he contributed quite a bit to this project.
Oh, absolutely. He's a sterling guitar player. He obviously played electric guitar with Wings, and then he got more and more into playing acoustic guitar. And I ran into him when I got introduced to him at the beginning of last year, and we did, oddly enough, the first dates we ever did together were in Colorado. I think March of '94. But when we came back from doing that, we thought it might be fun to write a song and see what happens. So I had the riff to Night Train to Munich. It was the first thing I had, and I went round there and played it to him, and we just put it down as an instrumental. And I took the tape home with me that night, and I literally just got out a pen and wrote the words in one pass. I mean, it was really quick. And then the next day I did the same thing with Lindy Comes to Town, so we wrote 2 songs in 2 days. My whole feel about this record, I was looking for a sort of an almost live sort of in-your-face quality. I just wanted it to be done really quickly because, well, a lot of the records of the 20s and 30s were recorded really quickly, like in 1 take or 2 takes. And I didn't want it to become a fussy record. I wanted it to be, bright and sort of almost brittle in a way.
Well, I think you achieved that.
Yeah.
That was one of the
So
things.
I mean, we didn't hang around. We wrote very, very fast. The only thing that slowed me down was the age of rhythm that I wrote 7 different sets of lyrics to because I was never happy with it. But then eventually, I found one that I could live with, so that's what we used.
Was there a lot of production work after the recordings?
No, I mean it was a very simple record to make. I mean, a lot of it literally was first take. I mean, Laurence and I would sit down and we'd just play the guitar parts, and then he'd like overdub a bass maybe, and we'd stick a fake rhythm section on it until we could get a proper drummer to come in and overdub on it. There was a fiddle player and an accordion player and several drummers and a bit of percussion and a bass player, and that's about it. It was mostly guitars. I would think that probably about at least half of everything you hear on the record is Laurence playing one thing or another. I didn't want a thoughtful, sort of ploddingly orchestrated album, like Time Passages, for example, because it just wasn't that. That wasn't what I was looking for here.